where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever really stood out. Most days it felt like I was floating through life, just another face in the crowd. But then something happened that turned everything upside down. We got a new teacher. His name was Mr. Harris, and from the moment he stepped into that classroom, everything changed. He wasn't like the other teachers. He wasn't just a teacher. He was young, barely 24, and he had this energy that made the whole room feel alive. He walked in, his dark hair slightly messy, like he'd been running late, which was pretty normal in our school, and immediately all the usual sounds of first day chaos stopped. It was like everyone was suddenly paying attention. He wasn't the type of teacher who stood behind a desk reading off a syllabus or staring at the chalkboard. No, Mr. Harris engaged us. He looked around the room like he was genuinely interested in what we thought, not just about the subject, but about us as people. And that made him different from all the other teachers who just came in, gave their lectures, and left. I couldn't help but notice the way the girls in the class would light up when he walked by. It wasn't just his good looks, though, yes, he was handsome, but there was something about the way he made you feel seen. He smiled at everyone, made jokes, and talked to us like we were equals. He was approachable, warm, and effortlessly cool in a way that made everyone feel comfortable. Even the shyest students like me found themselves opening up more. I remember feeling like I was living in the shadows before Mr. Harris came along. I was the quiet one, the girl who sat in the back of the classroom and never raised her hand. I didn't stand out, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Being invisible felt safer, but with him it was different. For the first time in a long while, I didn't mind being noticed. I didn't speak much, but I wanted to speak. Every time Mr. Harris asked a question, I felt the urge to raise my hand, even though my palms would get sweaty and my heart would race at the thought of him calling on me. The best part, it wasn't because I was afraid of being wrong. It was because when he did call on me, I felt seen. Mr. Harris didn't rush through anything. If someone was struggling, he'd stop and take the time to explain it again, even if it was the third time. He didn't act frustrated like some teachers did. Instead, he'd patiently work through the problem until everyone understood. I realised something pretty quickly. Mr. Harris didn't just care about getting through the lesson, he cared about us. That might not sound like a big deal, but when you've spent your life feeling like a face in the crowd, it really is. It made me admire him more than I could put into words. He was one of those rare people who made you feel like you weren't just a student in a classroom. He made you feel like you mattered. I found myself waking up earlier on the days I had his class, excited for the hour that felt different from all the others. I'd even pick out clothes I thought might make me stand out a little more. Nothing extravagant, just little things to maybe catch his eye. A new shirt, a different hairstyle, anything to feel a little more noticed. But I still stayed quiet. I wanted to speak up, but something held me back. When Mr. Harris smiled at me, when he said, "Great job, Emma," after I answered a question right, I felt like I had accomplished something more than just getting the answer right. It was like a secret victory, just between the two of us, and I couldn't wait for the next time he'd call on me. Even though my heart would race in my chest, I secretly actually talk to him, and that made me feel a little bit special, even though I never said much. I began to realise that this wasn't just about him being a good teacher. It was about something deeper, something magnetic about his personality that drew people in and made them feel like they mattered. His presence was like a burst of colour in an otherwise grey world. He made the classroom feel alive. He made me want to be there, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone. His class was the one time of day when I felt like I could breathe a little easier, like I wasn't just another quiet face blending in. But even with all of this, I never thought it would be anything more than that. A teacher-student relationship, admiration from a distance. There was no way someone like Mr. Harris would ever notice someone like me. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But then, as the weeks went by, I found myself hoping for one thing, just one thing, that somehow, in some small way, I'd get the chance to show him the person I was, underneath all the nerves, the shyness, and the quietness. Maybe, just maybe, he'd see me for more than just a student. Maybe he'd see me. And it was that hope, that quiet longing, that set the stage for everything that was about to happen. But I had no idea at the time that one small change in my life was about to turn everything upside down, and that Mr. Harris, the teacher who made me feel noticed and understood, would become someone who would change my life forever. As the weeks went by, I started to feel a shift inside me. I'd always been shy, keeping to my little corner of the world, but Mr. Harris was different. He wasn't like the other teachers who barely seemed to notice us. He took the time to engage with everyone, even the quiet ones like me. The more I got to know him in class, the more I realised just how much I admired him. There was one thing that stood out more than anything else: his smile. Every time he smiled, I felt like the world became a little bit brighter. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you mattered, like you were important. I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be the person who made him smile like that. But it was impossible, wasn't it? I was just Emma, the shy girl who always sat in the back. My friends teased me about how I never spoke up in class, and sometimes I'd hear them talk about how cute Mr. Harris was. They were always the ones making jokes and laughing with him, asking him silly questions. I never had the nerve to do that. I would just sit quietly, hoping that maybe he'd notice me in some way, though I wasn't sure how. There was one thing I started doing though. Every time I came to class, I'd pick out my best clothes. Nothing too fancy, just my favourite dress or top, hoping Mr. Harris might notice. It sounds silly, I know, but when you're a shy teenager, it's easy to convince yourself that something like that might make a difference. Maybe, just maybe, he'd see me as more than just the girl who kept her head down. On days when he called on me, I would feel my heart race. My hands would get all sweaty, and I'd try to speak, but my voice always seemed to betray me. Still, I pushed through. I couldn't let him see how nervous I was. I had to at least try to impress him, even if I felt like I wasn't good enough. And sometimes I did. I'd answer a question right, and he'd give me that smile, the one that made my stomach do flips. "Great job, Emma," he'd say, and for the rest of the day, I'd walk around with this goofy grin on my face, replaying crush I had. I knew it probably wasn't going anywhere, and yet I couldn't help but daydream about him sometimes. In my head, I imagined us talking outside of school, maybe sitting on a park bench and talking about life. But those dreams always seemed far away, as if I was wishing for something that could never happen. Still, I clung to the thought, finding comfort in the idea that maybe, just maybe, I meant something to him. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when Mr. Harris dropped the bombshell. I remember sitting at my desk, my mind wandering as usual, when he walked into the classroom with his usual calm demeanour. He placed his bag on the desk, gave us all his friendly smile, and started speaking. But today, there was something different in the way he held himself. Something that made me stop what I was doing and pay attention. I have an announcement to make, he said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something that sounded off. He paused for a second, as though trying to find the right words. I felt a strange tightening in my chest. Why was he acting like this? He had never been this serious in front of the class before. As some of you may know, he began, I've been offered a new job. It's in another city, and after much thought, I've decided to accept it. I'll be leaving at the end of this semester. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The room seemed to tilt, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Did I hear that right? He was leaving. Mr. Harris was leaving. I looked around the room, expecting someone else to react, but everyone else was just sitting there, quiet. Some of my classmates had a mix of shock and sadness on their faces, but it was mostly a murmur of confusion. I was in a daze, still trying to process what he had just said. I had never been the type to speak up, but I couldn't stop myself. I blurted out, "Where are you going?" My voice felt small, as if I was asking about something I had no right to know. Mr. Harris smiled, but it wasn't his usual bright, comforting smile. It was softer, a little sadder. "I'll be moving to a different city, about 3 hours away," he said. "It's a great opportunity for me, but it means I have to leave this school." I sat there, frozen, struggling to understand what he was saying. My mind raced. I hadn't prepared for this. He couldn't be leaving. Mr. Harris was my teacher, the one who made me feel like I mattered, the one who noticed me even when I didn't raise my hand. He couldn't just leave like this. As he continued speaking, I wasn't really listening anymore. I couldn't. My mind was filled with images of him, of the way he made me feel every time he smiled at me, the way he always gave me that little nod of encouragement when I was too shy to answer a question. The idea that he was going to be gone forever was too much to process. The bell rang and class ended, but I didn't get up. I stayed at my desk, not sure what to do next. I stared down at my notebook, the words blurry in front of me. I wanted to say something, to ask him more questions, to make him change his mind, but I didn't know how. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. I watched as the other students stood up, talking in low voices, already moving on from the announcement. They were probably used to this kind of thing. Teachers came and went, but this was different for me. Mr. Harris wasn't just any teacher. To me, he was more than that. He had been the one person who made me feel seen, the one teacher who understood me without needing me to a familiar place, the street where Mr. Harris had lived. I had walked by his house several times over the past few months, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, hoping for one more smile, one more hello. I didn't know why I was going there today. Maybe I thought seeing his house would make me feel closer to him, even if he wasn't there. Maybe I just needed to hold on to something familiar for a little longer. When I reached his street, my chest tightened. The house was quiet, as it always was now. No sign of him, no sign of anyone. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at the house. Everything felt so still, so final. He was leaving, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I turned around and walked back home slowly, my mind a mess of emotions. I kept thinking about all the things I hadn't said to him, things I didn't even know I wanted to say until it was too late. I hadn't asked him if he'd ever thought about staying. I hadn't asked if he'd ever considered how much he meant to me, how much I looked up to him, how much I had needed him. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to act normal, to focus on school, but it was impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Harris and the fact that he was leaving. It felt like I had lost something important. He wasn't just a teacher. He had been a friend, someone who helped me believe in myself, even when I didn't believe in me. The last day of class before the holidays came, and Mr. Harris gave us all a final goodbye speech. I could see the sadness in his eyes as he spoke, but he tried to keep it together, tried to be upbeat for us. "I've enjoyed getting to know each of you," he said. "I'm proud of all of you, and I hope you'll continue to chase your dreams, no matter where you go or what you do. You all have something special." When he looked at me, I felt a lump form in my throat. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I could feel the weight of everything we had shared in the past year, all the little moments, the encouraging words, the shared laughs. It felt like he was a part of my life I would never be able to replace. He gave us all his usual smile, the one that made me feel like I was the most important person in the room. And then, just like that, he was gone. There were no goodbyes, no tearful farewells, just a quiet, unspoken end to everything that had come before. I walked home that day feeling numb. The world outside seemed louder, more chaotic, without Mr. Harris there to make everything feel okay. I didn't know how to let go of this feeling, how to move on from something that had been such a big part of my life. How could I ever forget the teacher who had made me feel like I could do anything? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the things I never said, the things I wished I had told him. But in the end, I knew there was nothing I could do. He was gone, and I had to learn how to face the world without him. But I also knew that everything I had learned from Mr. Harris wasn't just about the subjects he taught me. It was about believing in myself, about knowing that sometimes, even if people leave, their influence stays with you. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth holding on to. Months passed, and life went on. I concentrated on my exams, focused on getting into university, and tried to forget about the hole Mr. Harris had left in my life. But then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was scrolling through my social media feed when I saw his name pop up. My heart skipped a beat. It was Mr. Harris. He had sent me a message. "Hey Emma, it's been a while. How are you?" I couldn't believe it. After all this time, after all those months of silence, he was reaching out to me. My hands were shaking as I typed my response. We started chatting, catching up on the years that had passed since he left. It was like picking up a conversation with an old friend. A few days later, we agreed to meet up. I was both nervous and excited. I spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, trying to look my best. I was eager to see him again, but after we met, I spent a lot of time thinking about everything that had happened. I remembered the young teacher who had made me feel special, but I also realised that my feelings had changed. I wasn't that shy, nervous girl anymore. I had grown up, and so had he. The next day, I went for a walk in the park to clear my mind. The rain started to fall softly, and it made me think about all the things in life that change. Just like the weather. Some things feel cold and sad, like the rain, but it also helps new things grow. It was a little like that with me. I had changed, and so had Mr. Harris. We both had new chapters in our lives, but the old ones still held a place in my heart. In the end, I realised that meeting him again wasn't just about rekindling old feelings. It was about recognising how far I had come since then. Life is full of surprises, and sometimes the best moments come when you least expect them. I'll always remember Mr. Harris, but I'm not the same girl I was when I first met him. And that's okay.